On June 26, 2013, Police Department Number 4 received a statement from Christina DeHanova's relatives. They claimed that the girl had disappeared, stopped answering the phone, and had not come to the evening meeting at work. The relatives immediately suspected something was wrong. Hello, this is Defunct City. Subscribe to our channel and don't forget to click on the bell so you don't miss new episodes and stay informed. Christine's character and lifestyle did not suggest ordinary carelessness. Family and friends, with misgivings, rushed to find her. On the same day, without waiting for the police to come looking for her, Christine's loved ones began to search the neighborhoods of all the places on her work route. In one evening they drove to every destination and interviewed every witness, and in every place she had been seen on the day of her disappearance. Since Christina did not return to work that day, the relatives concluded that the girl disappeared on her way from the last point to work and focused their search in that area. Already on the morning of June 27th, the relatives discovered a terrible discovery. In the woods they found Christina's lifeless body with multiple injuries. Near the body there were traces of blood, fragments of clothing, shoes, and a hairpin with false hair. The investigation began to find out who and where she had last seen her alive. Christina worked as a sales representative. On that day she was making her usual rounds of retail and catering outlets. The last place on her route was a summer cafe, where her body was found. Interviews with the cafe owner and the shashlicker indicated that Christina had not been there alone. She was accompanied by a tall young man who had been her trainee. Both witnesses had not seen him for the first time, so they described the young man's appearance in sufficient detail. Despite the fact that he tried to remain unnoticed, it was not difficult to identify the trainee. Andrei Chernikov, a fourth-year student, fit the definition of a major in many ways. He liked the beautiful life, went out wide, spent time in clubs, played billiards. He liked to show off for the girls. Fortunately, his pretty face allowed him to play the enviable cavalier. Except that the student spent his money too quickly. Andrew's parents divorced, and at 19 he lived in a separate apartment. His father, a businessman, regularly supplied his son with money. If it wasn't for gambling and partying in clubs, the boy could have lived without denying himself anything. But now and then he had to borrow. Not used to keeping his desires under control, by the summer of 2013, and owed a lot of money to almost all his friends. One of his friends, Evgeny, in response to another request to borrow money, offered Chernikov to start earning. He even helped him get an internship where he worked himself as a merchandiser for a wholesale soda company. On June 21st, Chernikov went to work for the first time. The trainee's duties were extremely simple. On his first day, he was attached to the experienced sales representative Christina DeHanova, and he drove around with her the whole day at retail outlets. The next day he went with another sales representative, then with a third. Only to his misfortune, Christina mentioned in his presence during a telephone conversation that she was going to take a large sum of money from one establishment, more than 100,000 rubles. Chernikov, stuck in debt, immediately began to imagine how he could use the money. On June 23rd, as Chernikov later told the interrogation, he was not supposed to go anywhere, but at lunchtime he was awakened by a phone call from Yevgeny. He asked why the intern wasn't at work and told him to call Christina and join her somewhere in the city. Chernikov hailed a cab, arrived at the Fisherman's House Cafe in Gidro-Strohotel. He had an ordinary kitchen knife in his handbag. According to Chernikov, he could not make up his mind to the last minute. He was very nervous and even vomited twice from excitement. At 5 p.m. they drove to their destination. When they had finished their business, Christine turned toward town, but in the middle of the woods the trainee, citing malaise, asked to stop and ran off into the bushes. When he returned, he sat in the back seat just behind the driver's seat. He pulled out a knife, leaned over the seat, grabbed the girl's neck with his left hand, and then began stabbing. Christine, though she did not expect the attack, did not lose her composure and did not dutifully wait to die. She struggled as hard as she could, trying to intercept the knife despite her shredded palms and fingers. She jumped out of the car and ran toward the cafe. Twice Chernikov caught up with her and toppled her to the ground, landing more blows. But he couldn't finish what he started. The victim fought back furiously. Multiple nail scratches were later found on Chernikov's hands. The girl lost consciousness from blood loss and shock. The perpetrator threw away the knife and dragged her into the woods, thinking she was already dead. After a few meters, he found a champagne bottle, picked it up, and hit the girl on the back of the head. Then he used the remaining rosebud and struck her several more times in the neck area. When he noticed that Christine was still breathing, he threw her own blouse around her neck and started strangling her with his foot on her back. The medical examiner later determined that the girl died of asphyxiation. Christina's relatives had to bury her in a closed coffin. More than 30 stab wounds were counted on her body by the experts. There was literally no place left alive. 2 of the wounds were penetrating stab wounds that damaged her lung. After checking the pulse and making sure of death, Chernikov dragged the body to a hollow and covered it with branches. Tried to bury it without much effort. He returned to the car, and here the deepest disappointment awaited him. In his purse he found only about 30,000 rubles. The large sum for which he went to murder was not there. Investigators later found out that Christina had asked a colleague to pick up that money for her on another day. He took Christina's phone and called his buddy, a colleague, asking him to come and pick it up. During the conversation, he lied that his cell phone ran out of power, and so he had to use someone else's. When his friend arrived, Chernikov came out of the woods, covered in blood, said he killed Christina and needed to hide her car. He got behind the wheel. They drove together to the border of the Dacha village, and right outside, near the first bus stop, the killer threw Christina's things away. After driving the car to the abandoned lots, he took out a bottle of mineral water, washed his hands, and apparently wiped the interior down a bit. Experts later found no traces of blood there. Abandoning the Toyota on a country lane, he took Christina's phone, her work phone, her pocket computer, her purse with cash, and moved to a friend's house. He drove him home and then drove to work to turn in the day's report. At home, Chernikov washed, changed his clothes, put the bloody things in a bag, and suddenly realized that he had forgotten his pocket computer and purse in Evgeny's car, the victims along with the money. He started calling and texting his friend, urging him not to report him to the police. Friends don't do that. Evgeny brought his things, and Chernikov got in the car with him. They drove to the Central District, to an auto-acoustic store. In the area of the Café Pharaoh, the killer asked to stop. He got out, unwrapped a bag over his head, and threw it into the woods. The clothes flew apart and hung from tree branches. That's how it was later found by investigators. But he didn't want to throw away his sneakers. Soaked them in a basin at home, hoping to wash them later. Christina's documents, keys, and purse were left lying among the pile of garbage. Investigators found them after a long search. The pocket computer and phone had flown out the car window somewhere between the Galakinsky cottages and the power plants. Investigators had to look at many thousands of square meters of the roadside before they found the computer. The cell phone must have been picked up by someone else. Its location was never found. Chernikov did not take one step away from his friend, who had become a dangerous witness. Fearing exposure, they drove around the city until 22 and then drove to the garage. All the while Chernikov kept begging Evgeny not to turn him in. He even gave him back part of his debt of 10,000 out of 15,000 rubles, in bills he had found in the murdered girl's purse, so that he would not hold a grudge against him. Yevgeny refused, not wanting to take the money obtained by crime. However, Chernikov stated that there was no difference in their origin. Still, he slipped the bundle into the glove compartment. Later, the money was seized by the investigator. The next morning, Evgeny was going to go to Krasnoyarsk for an auto sound competition. He had been preparing his car for them for several months, had invested a lot of money in it, and did not want his plans to go to waste. Despite Chernikov's entreaties, he didn't agree to take him along. At the request of the murderer, he drove him to the dacha to the murdered woman's car and drove away. The criminal drove the Toyota to his garage. As Chernikov explained at the interrogation, he planned to drive Christina's car to a deserted place and burn it. Surprisingly, after leaving so much evidence, he was somehow convinced that he would not be found. Meanwhile, investigators were untangling the tangle of connections between the victim and the suspect. On the morning of June 28, investigators summoned Yevgeny, who had already left for Krasnoyarsk. He did not cover up for his buddy and told everything he knew. The investigation later established the calls of Yevgeny to the police. He reported the crime committed by Chernikov. When asked why he didn't immediately turn in the thug to the police, the young man replied that he wanted to sort everything out first. In addition, he feared for his life, not knowing what else could be expected of him. Chernikov was immediately followed, and on the same day he was detained by the investigator. The suspect wasn't even going to deny anything and gave a detailed account of all the details of the crime. He didn't regret the murder he committed in the slightest. He was only worried that Christina had much less money than he had expected, and he smiled evilly, answering such questions from the investigator. The 19-year-old murderer showed no signs of remorse even later. Usually, friends and relatives of criminals do not believe to the last that they have committed a particularly serious crime. But the news that his son killed the girl did not cause any protest to Chernikov's father. He took almost no interest in the trial, although he could have afforded to bother to hire him a good lawyer. But Chernikov was given a public defender. The father seemed to realize that his son had blood on his hands. Classmates who were interrogated also spoke rather coolly of Chernikov. They said he was arrogant, selfish. He was always showing off. He had no friends. During the search of Chernikov's apartment, they found the keys to his missing car. There were sneakers covered in blood in his bathroom. Law enforcers went to search Chernikov's garage. There they found and examined Chernikov's car. There, experts seized biological material and took fingerprints. All traces pointed to Chernikov. He left a lot of evidence. Investigators would have had enough to prove his guilt in court. Chernikov was accused of committing a mercenary murder and robbery with causing grievous harm to the health of the victim. During the trial, he recanted his own confession and even tried to incriminate his friend Yevgeny. Allegedly, he killed the girl. But the investigation had more than enough evidence against Chernikov. But the alibi of Eugene was carefully studied by investigators and confirmed. At the end of March 2014, the Irkutsk Regional Court made a decision. Andrei Chernikov was sentenced to 17 years in a strict regime penal colony. He was also ordered to pay 2 million rubles for the moral damage and more than 90,000 rubles in material damages to the relatives of the victim. Chernikov tried to appeal the verdict, but to no avail.